Hello once again, my name is Charles R. Sabo, doing another teaching video on the book of Isaiah. I wrote a Bible commentary back in 2018 and 2019, and just recently I found that I forgot a lot of the things I wrote, and as I try to review them, I forget, and I start saying things that pertain to other chapters. I'm like, ah. So forgive me. I did that in chapter 22, by the way, so if you want a good laugh of some screw-ups I made, I found out, and corrected myself, but it can be hard to try to remember. 66 chapters, 623 pages. Um, anyway, it's on the market now. It was published back in 2020 in January. Very thorough study of the book of Isaiah, okay? A lot of details that you don't already know that you should probably review it with me, and I can clarify things for you because Isaiah can be confusing. I read it for years and understood bits and pieces. Then, as I broke it down hermetically after I graduated from seminary and so forth, it made more sense to me, and especially if you're breaking it down word for word, verse by verse. So I did the work for you, so bear with me and follow along with me. Chapter 23, this is the last chapter of the burdens of a certain people. From chapter 16 on through 23 are the burdens of various peoples. 16 started out with Moab, works its way through Egypt and Assyria and what have you, and Babylon, what have you. Now this is a burden of somebody else. Let's take a look. Back to chapter 23, here we go. This is an introduction to the chapter. The Bible reveals a history between Israel and Tyre when King David and Hiram, the king of Tyre, maintained an intimate alliance. King Solomon utilized the good relationship with King Hiram to acquire cedar and fir trees for the building of the first temple. That's in 1 Kings 9:11. Hiram sent his builders to accompany King Solomon's builders to build the first temple. From the blessings of being directly involved in the construction of God's temple, Tyre flourished in being the greatest port for trade in the Mediterranean Sea. When Pekah and Rezin intended to place upon the throne of Judah the son of the Tyrian ruler, you can find that in Isaiah 7:6, King Ahaz sought out the Assyrians for help against Syria and Israel, northern kingdom. This caused a falling away from God's grace for both King Ahaz and Judah, as well as Tyre for being involved in the conquest against Judah. The Assyrians focused on the demise of all the lands, including Tyre. The great merchant city was under siege, but not destroyed until later by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So as you saw in chapter 21, the prophecy of what Babylon was going to do, Nebuchadnezzar was going to do to Israel, the Valley of Vision. The first, I believe, 14 verses pertaining to that. Here we're talking about Tyre. All right, so you can see there's a little map here, Tyre, and how far away the ships would go. All right, so you have an idea. It's all the way across the Mediterranean Sea that they took ships across onto Tarshish, I believe. Now, verse 1. The burden of Tyre. How, you ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in from the land of Chittim, it is revealed to them. So that's why I have this map here. Look at Tyre over here on the west coast of the Middle East, near Israel. And Tarshish was in Spain. All right? Now, the land of Chittim consisted of Cyprus, which were the islands of the Mediterranean Sea. Later, it was referred to as Chittim in Daniel 11:30, which is now known as Italy and the Romans. History confirms that the ships of Chittim mentioned in Daniel 11:30 were in fact Romans of the later Roman Empire. As you can see on the map, Italy is nearly halfway between Tarshish and Tyre, while Cyprus is not even 1/4 of the way to Tarshish. Chittim originates from the Hebrew Kittim, a Gentile plural for a foreign origin, Genesis 10:4. Kittim, Numbers 24:24, that's how it's spelled. 1 Chronicles 1:7, Kittim in Daniel 11:10. The people of Kittim were a branch of the descendants of Javan, the son of Japheth, right? Japheth was the son of Noah. So there's the history of Chittim. Now, going back up here, if you want to see where Chittim is, here's Italy over here, right? So it's a little over halfway. Now, I didn't read the, no, I did read that. Okay, verse 2. Be still, you inhabitants of the isle, you whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. Tyre consisted of 2 pieces of land, one area off the main shoreline of now Lebanon, and the second was an island about 800 meters, not very far, huh? 800 meters off the mainland shore, right? The shore of the mainland. So here's a kind of a map that represents it. This is the siege of Tyre from 332 BC. Old Tyre, and then Tyre the island, right? Okay. Verse 2 speaks of the inhabitants of the island offshore. God had instructed them to be still. There is in reference to the inhabitants having fled from the mainland for safety when the Babylonians have come to destroy Tyre of the mainland. They would be still in safety as they were provided a replenishment of food and necessities by the ships of Sidon, which was located 40 kilometers north of the mainland Tyre. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon seized mainland Tyre between 586 and 573 BC. Okay, see where we're going with this so far. All right, so this is prophesied by Isaiah, by the way, 120 years before it happened. All right, Isaiah was given the prophecy 120 years before King Nebuchadnezzar. All right, I'm reading from something from Lynn H. Wood, Nebuchadnezzar's Siege of Tyre. All right, so she studied the Siege of Tyre. By the times of Ramses II, 1292 to 1225 BC, the island was also known as Tessor, and it was stated that drinking water was brought there in boats. All right. Now, from that time on, down the past days of the Assyrian aggressions, there is plenty of evidence that the town on the shore was a chief seat of population. Right. The town on the shore, right here. Right? Okay. The event which the inhabitants of the island of Tyre had fled would be both the Assyrian aggressions and the 13-year siege of mainland Tyre by Babylon. Because of the 13 years siege of the mainland by Babylon, they were replenished by Sidon. Amazingly, Isaiah had prophesied of what had later come to pass with precision, right? 120 years before it happened. Excuse me. Around 120 years. I don't know the exact date. The Bible has provided the reason God had brought his wrath upon Tyre within Ezekiel 26. The children of Judah had sought out refuge from Tyre during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Okay? So obviously the siege of Tyre happened after the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. All right? And Ezekiel 26:2 says, Son of man, because that Tyre has said against Jerusalem, aha, she is broken that was with gates of the people. She is turned unto me, I shall be replenished. Now she is laid waste. So they refused to help the fleeing Jews. Because Tyre had laughed at the desperation of the fleeing children of Israel who came to Tyre for replenishment, but they fell and were laid waste. Okay? They refused to help them. All right, we're going to go to Ezekiel 26:35. 26:25. Ezekiel 26:3-5. Sorry about that. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Tyrus, and will cause many nations to come up against you at the sea, as the sea comes his waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyrus and break down her towers, and I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. And it shall be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea. For I have spoken it, saith the Lord God, and it shall become a spoil of to the nations. Now, Ezekiel gives the exact thing that's going to happen to Tyre before it did happen. Isaiah is prophesying of it here, but there's something that you must know, and I think I explained it here. Notice in Ezekiel 26:3, God declares that he will cause many nations to come against Tyre. Right? Many nations. Right? And he compares it as if the sea causes its waves to come up. So one wave of a nation, and the next nation is another wave, then another wave. Okay, that's God's imagery they used through Ezekiel. All right, by the time Ezekiel had written this, Assyria had already been there. Babylon would come with their allies, the Chaldees, the Syrians, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. Later, the fall of the island of Tyre was to be afflicted by Greece and Alexander the Great. God represents this as destruction to be in waves and not one single siege or event, when he declares that it will be as the sea causes its waves. Right? Ezekiel 26:4 was accomplished by the Babylonian wave between 586 and 573 BC. Nebuchadnezzar scraped the land clean where a city no longer existed, which caused the island to be without its ship from the mainland, which caused them to seek Sidon for replenishment. The desolation became a place where the fishermen spread their nets, coming in from sea. Nebuchadnezzar was not intended to seize the island, though he may have tried by ship. Since the defense would be stronger from a land defense, the catapults sinking the many ships sent out, the island of Tyre had held the defense of the island city through that wave of siege. Okay? All right. Verse 3. And by great waters the sea of Sihor, the harvest of the river, in her revenue, and she is a mart of nations. The verse connects with verse 2, with the use of the word and. The seed of Sihor would be the offspring market to the major world market originating from the Nile River of Egypt. Joshua 13:3 and 1 Chronicles 13:5, Jeremiah 22:18, right? The Tyre was the mart of market to the nations of the world. Tyre's replenishment was coming from the Nile River market, so Tyre could still continue to be the merchant of the nations from the island without the mainland port of Tyre. God had used Isaiah to prophesy this before it happened. So, Tyre became a major merchant, island only. No, you can't get to us because we have catapults, so ships could not defeat them. But Nebuchadnezzar could not. And here it says, and by great waters the seed of Sihor, the harvest of the river, in her revenue, and she is a mart of the nations, the island of Tyre. Okay? Verse 4. Be you ashamed, O Zidon, for the sea hath spoken it, even the strength of the sea, saying, I travail not, nor bring forth children, neither do I nourish up young men, nor bring up virgins. The sea is to be interpreted allegorically. The sea represents the waves of siege, which will be hitting the offspring of Zidon, who were the people of Tyre. The sea is the hand of God. Sea hath spoken, right? And his waves of siege on Tyre. The waves of God's wrath are the strength of the sea of God's wrath. God's wrath does not travail, wait anxiously, nor does it bring forth children unto Zidon out of Tyre, nor does God's wrath nourish up young men of Tyre, nor does God's wrath bring up virgins of Tyre. Right? It's a curse through a wave of sieges that they're eventually going to perish based on the fact that they can't have another generation come. God's preventing even the next generation of Tyre. Okay. So Zidon was part of Tyre, replenished off of Zidon as a city that was a part of the Tyrian dynasty or whatever, that ended up replenishing the island. All right. Verse 5. As the report concerning Egypt, so shall they be sorely pained at the report of Tyre. As expressed within the verse 3, Egypt, the seed of Sihor, was the main supplier, the harvest of the river. to the world market, which would distribute to the world through the parts of Tyre. Just as the howls would be heard from those receiving ports in Tarshish, over in Spain, so would the howls be heard by the supplier who depended so greatly on the distribution of the merchandise to the ports of Tyre. Right? So Egyptians couldn't sell their many things, the rugs and stuff like that that they were weaving, and all that coming from the rivers, the delta, and the river being the Nile. They were the major supplier to the world market. Now their major distribution center, their major transport, is being destroyed. So the howling was going to come from Egypt too. All right. Pass you over to Tarshish. How, you inhabitants of the isle? The inhabitants of the island of Tyre had fled there from the mainland in order to avoid the captivity of Babylon. They howled over their lost mainland harbors, which the ships from Egypt would pass by and keep going to Tarshish, which caused a fall in the importance of Tyre. All right. Now, verse 7. Is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is of ancient days? Her own feet shall carry her afar off to sojourn. This has become a fulfillment of what was prophesied in Joel 3, verses 3 through 8. All right. Joel 3 through 8 was put there as a prophecy that would later come true. Okay? Isaiah told about it, and it came true later also. But if you read, and we're going to go over this a little bit here, the people of Tyre, Sidon, as well as Philistia, were carried away as slaves to Babylon, then later Greece. God began his taunt upon Tyre, who had flourished with the merchandise of ancient Egypt, and then on with king of Tyre, having been the main supplier unto Israel in building of the first temple. Babylon led the inhabitants of mainland Tyre off in captivity to Babylon. Her own feet shall carry her far off to sojourn, dwell for a time. All right? To dwell for a time. All right. So, see that? The slaves. They're taken away as slaves. Verse 8. Who have taken his counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth. God taunts Tyre by asking them, who is it that takes counsel against them? The crowning city of the merchants, whose merchants became so wealthy and highly regarded, were as royalty of the countries being supplied. God reminds Tyre that he is the one who has taken counsel against them. Now, on that previous verse, Joel 3 through 8, and dealing with the slavery, the merchant slavery, I wrote a Bible commentary on Joel, Zephaniah, Zechariah, 3 Bible commentaries in one book. I give great detail in chapter 3 of this event, of 3 verses 8. Okay, so if you want to learn more about that history, you can go to my book called Joel, Zephaniah, Zechariah. In fact, there's a video here on YouTube on Joel chapter 3 and my teaching of it, okay, if you want to check there. The Lord of hosts has proposed it to stain the pride of all glory and to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. That's verse 9. God continues from verse 8 in reminding Tyre that they had puffed themselves up with the foolish pride, and he was the one to stain their glory by breaking them into pieces. God revealed that they are not too good to receive God's vengeance against them, and he will bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. Right? They think they're too good for God. Verse 10. Pass through your land as a river, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more strength. Because the Phoenicians, Philistia, were such great shipbuilders and sea travelers, the city of Tyre became the most prevalent seaport of the Mediterranean Sea. The desire for the marketplace from Egypt came through Tyre seaport and then on to Tarshish. Tyre became so wealthy and successful, thus was born a daughter to her parents, Egypt and Tarshish. Tarshish depended on Tyre to get there as the main port. Egypt depended on Tyre as the main port. Egypt was sending Tarshish its goods, and they both depended on Tyre. So they were the daughter of Tarshish. They were also the daughter of Egypt, right? When a person crosses over a river, they cross speedily in order to avoid being taken by the river and cannot dwell or live within the river. God suggests here for the people of Tyre, daughter of Tarshish, to pass through their land as if they were hastily crossing over a river, lest they be consumed by being in the land. Babylonian inhabited it now. They have no more strength or ability to dwell in their own land, right? It has become a river that they have to pass over quickly. Right? Hurry, get through here. It used to be their own place. Now it's a river they got to pass through quickly because the Babylonians rule over it. Verse 11, he stretched out his hand over the sea. He shook the kingdoms. The Lord has given a commandment against the merchant city to destroy the strongholds thereof. Now, God, he gave his command to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to destroy the merchant city, thus causing a ripple effect on the kingdoms of the world. He didn't destroy. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar never destroyed the island of Tyre. Alexander the Great did. All right, a century or so later. Now, a couple of centuries later, actually. God, he stretched out his hand over the sea market of the kingdoms by destroying their main port, being Tyre, mainland Tyre. The remaining island of Tyre was left after the fall of the mainland seaport. The next wave was to come when God would bring Alexander the Great to destroy the island of Tyre. Now, and he said, you shall no more rejoice, O you oppressed virgin, daughter of Zidon. Arise, pass over to Chittim. There also shall you have no rest. There they will have no rest. Within this verse, it makes more logical sense that this port in Chittim may be closer than the Italian port of Chittim, mentioned in Daniel 11:30. Cyprus was a more convenient port to flee to. The oppressed virgin is Tyre, who was the daughter of physical offspring of Zidon. Right? God said that Tyre would no longer rejoice in their wonderful economy and well-positioned place on the sea. He tells them to go ahead and pass over to their partner seaport, Chittim, for refuge, because they will have no rest in the land of Tyre, nor in the land of Chittim. The enemies of Tyre would still come and find them wherever they were to flee, because God sent the Medes and the Persians to Chittim, as well as Alexander the Great and the Greeks. Alexander favored the children of Judah and sold these Tyrians, Zidonians, and Philistines as slaves to Judah, who then sold them to the Sabians as a fulfillment of Joel 3:3-8. See what I'm saying here? Isaiah prophesied it first, then Joel did, then it came to pass. I should say Joel first. I think Joel was in existence. Joel wrote before Isaiah, I want to say. Remembering right, Joel's an older prophet than Isaiah. But the thing is, Joel talked about it, Isaiah talked about it, it then came to pass. All right? So, Alexander the Great was one who took part in the fulfillment of that. All right. Verse 13. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans. This people was not till the Assyrian founded it for them that dwell in the wilderness. They set up the towers thereof, they raised up the palaces thereof, and he brought it to ruin. After much discussion of the origin of the Chaldeans within this book already, the information can be brought into this verse. Both the Assyrians and the Babylons were Aramaeans, sons of Aram. The Assyrians had built an empire, but later fell to the Babylonians and King Nabopolassar. Okay, now Nabopolassar was an Aramaean of the Chaldee tribe, also known as the Chaldeans. After a year of guerrilla-type warfare, Nabopolassar sat on the throne of Babylon on November 23rd of 626 BC. This was the 11th and last dynasty of Babylon, known as the Chaldean Empire or the Neo-Babylon Empire. Okay, Nabopolassar took Nippur while also liberating Sumer and Akkad. By 617 BC, he had cleared out out of Babylonia the Assyrian garrisons south of the neck. In 616 In 616, he marched up the Euphrates to the district of Haran, to Arupka and Ashur. He established bases in this area. In 614 BC, Cyaxares, Media, marched against Nineveh. Which was too strong for him, but he took Ashur and Tarbisu and inflicted great destruction. Nabopolassar met him after the battle, and they established a friendship. A marriage did seal this union, in which the Babylonian prince Nebuchadnezzar would marry Amytis. Amytis. In 613 BC, the Medes were ineffective. This allowed Assyria to mount a counterattack. In 612 BC, Nabopolassar united with Cyaxares and Umamanda in an attack on Nineveh. After a 2 or 3 month siege, they destroyed the famous city of Nineveh. The city was sacked and plundered, and the people were enslaved. So there's your history coming into fulfillment. The context of this verse is God, he generated the evolution of the Chaldean Empire by bringing them to take down Assyria first. They were all Aramaeans, but he took down the Assyrians first. He brought it to ruin. The Assyrians were of the same genealogy as the Babylonians. The Assyrians built the palaces and temples, then Babylon came from the wilderness. This people was not, and overwhelmed Assyria and ruled in their place. Okay? That's what's meant by verse 13. Okay? Verse 14. How you ships of Tarshish, howl, for your strength is laid waste. Here we go. The ships of Tarshish. This begins the second wave of the destruction of Tyre. The island of Tyre was still accomplishing its merchant port in spite of losing their mainland harbor. The ships of Tarshish utilized the seaport of the island of Tyre. God had declared here unto Tarshish that they will howl again as God sends his next wave of destruction. For your strength is laid waste. Okay? So, it's all coming to pass. Just as Isaiah said it would. History reveals it. I mean, this is all prophesied. We're talking like 100 or over 100 years later it came to pass. Verse 15. Actually, with this one here, Alexander the Great was in the 4th century. I believe it was the 4th century. Yeah, 4th century BC. And so this is as many as 3 centuries later. All right. And it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as a harlot. 70 years after the Babylonian destruction of mainland Tyre, the Zidonians and Tyrians were to perform an adulterous act, sing as a harlot. The years of a king is 70 years, according to this verse. The days of our years are 30 and 10, Psalm 90, verse 10a. Spiritual idolatry is what God calls harlotry, or acting as a harlot, when it comes to worshiping him only. Tyre was to then become the merchant giant that it was and be central to the merchant markets and worldly goods, which the world would seek above anything having to do with God. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great brought the Greek army to the shores of Tyre. They built the land bridge across the 80-meter bay water which separated the islands of Tyre from the mainland. They invaded the island of Tyre and totally destroyed it. Now, 332 BC, we're talking Isaiah writing this in like 710 BC. We're talking 400, like 380 years later, right? So Alexander the Great, instead of taking ships across and getting destroyed by catapults, they were hauling huge boulders from the mainland and making a land bridge. And it took a while to do, but it was an 80-meter bay of water which separated the island of Tyre and the mainland. They invaded the island of Tyre and totally destroyed it by building a land bridge. It took quite a while to build a land bridge by doing this, but Alexander the Great was great and he did do it. Verse 16, once he set his mind to something, he got it done. Take it harp, go about the city, you harlot that has been forgotten, make sweet melodies, sing many songs, that you may be remembered. Now, thinking back, I mean, this is all God's will. Isaiah prophesied it to happen. Therefore, Alexander the Great fulfilled so many prophecies, this one of it. So he was bound to succeed because God declared it. There was no way Alexander the Great knew he was supposed to do this, but he did it, and he fulfilled Bible prophecy by doing it. The song or melody was to be singing the songs of rejoice while selling the world its merchandise, singing the songs of a sales pitch sounding sweet to the ears of the buyers. Their rebound back into the leader of the world merchant trade was their happiness and their song. Okay, so here we are, taking harp, go about the city, you harlot that has been forgotten, make sweet melodies, sing many songs that you may be remembered, right? So you can continue to sing, but you're going down, is what he's saying here. Verse 17 and 18, put them together as a set. And it shall come to pass after the end of the 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, and shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. All right. She shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. Now, I'm going to give you something written by Matthew Henry. I don't care for much of what Matthew Henry wrote, but this was pretty fitting. So I felt it was good to insert here. So this is all from his Matthew Henry's Bible commentary on, I think it was on this very verse. So this is what Matthew Henry had to say about this verse. The desolation of Tyre were not to be forever. The Lord will visit Tyre in mercy, but when set at liberty, she will use her old arts of temptation. The love of worldly wealth, the love of worldly wealth is spiritual idolatry, and covetousness and spiritual idolatry. This directs those that have wealth to use it in service of God. When we abide with God in our worldly callings, when we do all in our power to further the gospel, then our merchandise and hire our holiness to the Lord. If we look to his glory, Christians should carry on business as God's servants and use riches as his stewards. This is the only thing that makes sense of this verse. And it shall come to pass after the destruction, at the end of the 70 years, that the Lord will visit Tyre. The Lord visits Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. Now, the use of the merchandise, right, was to be used as holiness for the Lord. Now, let's move on, and it will start to make sense. And her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness unto the Lord, right? It shall be treasured. It shall not be treasured nor laid up, for her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently, and for durable clothing. Now, with the Lord's first coming to the earth, he did visit Tyre and showed mercy upon them, as he did the entire world. Matthew 15, 21 through 25, Mark 3, 8, Luke 6, 17. The goods which Tyre had brought to the lust of the world was turned to the missionary work of the church and the teaching of the gospel. So all of her work they did to commit fornication, and the king and so selling it to the kingdoms of the earth that were buying it out of fornication, worshiping gods, and their lusts for being wealthy. It then later got turned into being the goods being used for the gospel. The single largest ministry and single largest expenditure of money on the earth in the entire history of mankind has been the preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. The mercy of the Lord had been preached to the entire planet as the Great Commission, and the merchandise and the hire of the adulteries of Tyre has in turn been a hire by the Lord, and is holiness unto him. All right? So, her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to the Lord. Eventually, all of the stuff that was bought and sold, out of lusts and covetousness. It shall not be treasured nor laid up. For her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord. So it was brought. It was then to be given as gifts. The wealth was given as gifts unto the Lord Jesus Christ in His ministry. I guess you can point out Catholicism. They did expenditure a lot of the wealth of the world, but the wealth that was passed on through these nations built up seaports, built up peoples, made them strong, made them blessed by the merchandise. They prospered. Then the gospel came. So all that idolatry, all of that fornication, worshiping other gods, buying, becoming wealthy, then the gospel came. And these people that survived, that were idolatrous, listened to the gospel. Is the best way to think of this. And her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness unto the Lord. It caused the whole land to prosper for centuries, didn't it? And then it shall not be treasured nor laid up. For her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord. So the people that had the merchandise then become believers to eat sufficiently and for durable clothing. So they prosper having the gospel. Here's this wealth that I have. Praise Jesus. And now we're feeding the lost, and we're doing so. It ended up becoming useful in ministry, because the people who had the wealth, who acquired the wealth over the centuries, who had the wealth when the gospel finally came, when Jesus finally came, they used it for the benefit of the gospel, for passing on to the gospel. So, wow, the merchandise that was used as idolatry back in the 4th through the 7th century, then it remained in their possession. The people that ended up buying it maybe got sold and passed around a little bit. Then the gospel came. Then Jesus was born, Jesus lived, and started his ministry. And those same, it would be ancestors of these people that had the merchandise, heard the gospel, became believers, and used the merchandise towards the benefit of the gospel. That's what this is about. Okay? So that's why I chose, what's his name, Matthew Henry's. He's the only one really that could see this. That the merchandise ended up becoming merchandise of godly Christians. And then it was used to glorify God. So, amazing verse 17 and 18. Read them together, right? There's 17 right here, right? That's 17. Here's 18. I said to put them together here, but I ended up doing 18 separate. But can you see it here? Does it make sense here? I mean, Tyre was destroyed. Alexander the Great destroyed it. So the market's gone. So whoever had the merchandise doesn't have a market to go to sell it. So they kept it. Maybe they sold it between each other, walking distance, or I put it on this ship and sent it over to someone. But for the most part, the merchant city, Tyre, was gone. So the people held on to, for the most part, had a hold of their possessions that they had bought through the ports. And centuries later, generations later, this merchandise became holy unto the Lord, because the people became Christian and they had this merchandise and they blessed other people with it. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me today. Hit like down below if you enjoyed this video. God bless you. Come back for the next. We go into the series of 4 chapters, which is known as Isaiah's mini apocalypse. He goes into the 70th week of Daniel. He talks about it. Chapters 24 through 27, the mini apocalypse. He and the Apostle John, you can marry the two as far as what they're saying, as well as Joel, Zephaniah, and Zechariah, and what they were saying as well, because they spoke about the 70th week of Daniel very much also, as well as Daniel. But so come with me through those 4 chapters, 24 through 27. It'll be quite a journey. Until the next time, may God bless you. Have a great day.